Thank you very much. I haven't said anything yet. I'm afraid I have one clarification. I'm not just one of the signers of the Agile Manifesto, I'm the first signer. Alphabetically, please. When I was a kid, we played with language the way every generation does to try and make themselves as impossible to understand as possible to the next older generations. And one of the words that we used was bad, which meant good, which led to some interesting conversations like, oh, this is some bad music. Why are you still listening to it? Oh, because I really enjoy it. But you just said it was bad. So a phrase like bad mamma jamma, which unfortunately I don't think I've used in 40 years, was common at that time. So that's thread number one. I usually have 2, 3, 4 threads, and I pull them together. So this is going to be one of those in case you're waiting. So I remember the first Extreme Programming Conference. Extreme Programming is what Agile used to be called. There was a panel about what now you'd call digital transformation. And one of the attendees at the panel put their hand up and said, but if we do a better job than the people around us, everybody's going to want to be like us, right? And I looked around the room and I said, I see 5 teams represented here in this room. And for each of the 5 teams, they achieved extraordinary results by the standards of their organization. They had very few bugs. They had happy customers. They were shipping a lot of functionality on predictable schedules, all the things that we were told we wanted. And every single one of those teams was fired. And so what's going on here? There's a mystery, a language mystery. People say they want X, you deliver X, you get fired. So what's going on with this? So that's the second thread. The third thread came about because my oldest is a principal software engineer. And kind of want your kids to grow up to kind of be like you, but then kind of you don't. And then kind of you figure out it's not up to you. So this was one of those, the only one of my kids who went into programming specifically. And Beth said to me, she was in a large software organization, Beth said, I proposed a project, and my boss said to me, that would be fine if we lived in a forest. But we live in a desert. Sometimes it's a moment like that refocuses everything. And we started playing with this metaphor of the forest and the desert. And what we realized was that words and concepts mean completely different things depending on the context you're in. Just like my teenage vocabulary meant the opposite of things to my parents, just as today's teenage vocabulary means the opposite of things to me. That's how things are supposed to go. So what are these, I call them parallel universes, because they look superficially similar, but they're really, really different And it's very hard to communicate between the two. And oh my goodness, good luck if you want to move from the desert into the forest. It's possible, and we'll talk about that towards the end, but it's very, very difficult. So, oh, by the way, these are not AI-generated cartoons. Just a moment of that. I've been having so much fun augmented coding. Oh, I cannot tell you. And I could talk for 2 hours just about augmented coding, and I won't at all. So ask me questions afterwards, please. Okay, so we have this divide. We have these two worlds, these two universes with mutually incompatible belief systems. Where does that come from? So at Ordev earlier this year, maybe it was last year. The time's going fast, especially when you're augmented coding. I gave a joint keynote with Beth in which we introduced this concept of the forest and the desert. How many people were at that keynote or have seen it since? Okay, nobody. Okay, you guys, but statistically nobody. Okay, good. So where does this come from? Where does this divide come from? And so I wanted to dig deeper into the roots of what I was talking about. In short, the forest is an area of sufficient resources. There's enough time. There are enough skills. There's enough slack in the schedule to do things in the kinds of ways that tend to generate more resources. And the desert is a land with never enough. There's never enough time. There's never enough skills. There's no time for community. There's no time for reflection. There's no time for learning. We have to get this done now. If you tell me you can do it in 6 weeks, I'm going to tell you you have to do it in 4. Of course, you know I'm going to subtract 2, so you're going to add 2 to your 6 to make it 8. But I know that you know that I'm going to, never mind. This is sounding familiar. So where does this divide come from? And I want to go back to the to really origins in Western thought. Jean-Jacques Rousseau was a philosopher, and his philosophy was based on the idea that people are basically good with some notable exceptions. Now, it would be too easy to point out particular notable exceptions in my own country at this moment, so I'm not going to do that. Also, I want to get back into my country. But people are basically good. And yeah, there's exceptions and you got to worry about some people, but mostly people are good. Thomas Hobbes, on the other hand, was an English philosopher known for a book called Leviathan, in which he argues that people are basically bad. The natural state of life is nasty, brutish, and short. This guy was a hoot at parties. And we needed this gigantic state to force people to do good things. In the forest, we follow Rousseau. People are basically good. Yes, you have to be prepared for the people who aren't, but people are going to do good things. People aren't going to try and rip you off. People aren't going to pad schedules and so on. In the desert, you make the Hobbesian assumptions, because if you don't get to the water hole, you die. So we have to get to the water hole at all costs. That phrase, at all costs, is a really interesting one because it never means at all costs. That's another one of those. So that's the basic assumption. Now we see these assumptions play out in the forest in the late 19th century management consultant, Mary Parker Follett, who emphasized power with instead of power over. She was a contemporary of Frederick Winslow Taylor, one of the original industrial engineers, one of the people who kicked off time and motion studies, someone who authored a little book, a chilling little book called Scientific Management. He didn't put in the scare quotes on scientific, but I do. Because it turns out he faked all of his data. Anyway, Frederick Taylor, Taylorism, you may have heard of it. That's very much a set of desert assumptions. The workers are lazy, venal, and stupid, and you give them more money as a bribe to behave in exactly the way that you tell them to. Because after all, if the workers behave exactly as they're told to do, everything will be fine. Because the management knows everything and nothing's going to change. That's a very desert set of assumptions. Whereas Mary Parker Follett, who's nowhere near as famous as Taylor, assumes that the purpose of management is getting people to work together. In the forest, we lead with purpose. This has been a theme of mine lately, over the last couple of years. The value of leading with purpose. And this is, leading with purpose is a pulling kind of gesture. And one thing about pulling is, if you've ever towed a trailer, if the trailer gets a little off center and you're pulling it, it tends to come back onto center. Whereas if you've tried to back up that same trailer, you know that if you're a little bit off when you're backing up, you're going to get more off. And the more you push, the worse it gets. In the desert, you manage with pressure. Here, it'll take 6 weeks, has to be done in 4. What are all the requirements? We need these 6 features. Which one would you like to see first? You don't understand. I need all 6 features, or the world will come to an end. At least your employment will. That's pressure. In the desert, in a desert frame, pressure makes sense. Because you just assume that if you don't squeeze every last ounce of productivity, don't get me started on that, out of every person, it's going to be a complete disaster. So you push. So everybody does absolutely the most they possibly can. And you fire the bottom 10%. How's that measured? Don't ask. In the desert, pressure makes sense. In the forest, it doesn't, because people are motivated by purpose. In the forest, you assume change. I wrote this book, Extreme Programming Explained. The subtitle is Embrace Change. And I look back at that. All right, so when was that written? 96? So, is that 30 years? Shit. But 30 years ago, me, I'm going to give myself a pat on the back for emphasizing the one thing that terrifies people in the desert, which is really embracing change at every level. The extreme programming teams embrace change in terms of process, in terms of tools, in terms of relationships, in terms of scale, in terms of markets, in terms of customers, in terms of architecture, in terms of design, everything is assumed to be changing all the time, and that's fine. And an XP team works very hard to make sure that it is fine. It's not something that just happens just because you come up with a slogan. It's something that you work hard to prepare for. In the desert, oh man, prediction. Because you assume that if you don't get to the next water hole, you're gonna die. So we have to know exactly where that water hole is. And if we get there and there's no water there, we're dead. That's it. So if you get there and there's no water there, you did something wrong. You could have predicted better. Try harder next time, assuming there's a next time for you. In the forest, it just makes no sense. Why would you have a roadmap of features that's a year long? Like, sorry, I think I just touched a nerve. Apologize for that. You know, let's take ourselves forward a year and we look back at what we accomplished. We are not going to do what's on the 1 year's worth of roadmap. Period. Never happened, never will happen. It's impossible unless somebody fudges the numbers. So why plan that far out in advance? Now, there are decisions that genuinely take years to play out, like you need a new data center and it's just going to take you 4 years to set it up. Of course you plan for that. But in terms of most of what you do in the forest, why would we predict? We may come in Monday morning and all of the assumptions that we based all of our decisions on have changed, in which case we'll be really happy that we didn't make those decisions yet. In the desert, makes no sense to operate that way, because if we don't get to the water hole, we're dead. In the forest, we emphasize community. Nobody does this alone. Nobody accomplishes anything by themselves of any substance. Even if you start something that turns out to have big consequences, you won't be doing it alone. Now, I'm not saying this is easy. Some people think, oh, forest, that means stuff's easy. No, there's thorns in the forest. There's predators in the forest. You don't have to have a bunch of fences up, because if you step off the path, you are going to get hurt. There's consequences in the forest. But that's why you have community. So that when those things happen, when you hit the bumps in the road, you're not trying to do it alone. And had a conversation last night about the importance of community and the lengths to which you can go to encourage social cohesion, if that's what you're paying attention to. In the desert, community is dangerous. What you want is control. Because after all, if all these people do exactly what they're told, everything's going to be fine. Assuming you know what's going to happen next and nothing changes and you don't learn anything. Which is an interesting set of assumptions to make, especially when the world is changing out underneath us the way it is. This all boils down for me to the contrast between what I call cake strategy and crumb strategy. Here's the thing, the desert is insanely profitable. We work in software, software scales software makes so much money done badly that there's very little evolutionary pressure to do a really good job of it. Beth and my first talk was called "We Know How to Write Good Software." It's another one of these mystery talks. We know how to write good software. Why aren't we doing it? And the forest in the desert is our explanation for why that happens. But from my perspective, yes, the desert's profitable, but we're eating crumbs off the floor. There is another way where we sit up at the table like grown-ups and we eat cake off the plate. The crumbs are delicious, but it's the floor. And have you seen what the dog just did? I don't want to eat that. If somebody chooses to eat crumbs and creates a desert and crumbs is all they get and they're happy with it, okay, but I'm not going to shut up about the alternative, because there is an alternative. There's a different way of working together. It requires skill development, it requires personal development, responsibility, accountability, social skills. One way of looking at extreme programming is it's a set of social interactions in a frame so that people like me who are uncomfortable, supremely uncomfortable at a cocktail party, can still interact with people on a project and kind of know what the interaction's going to be like. So I won't be anxious about the interaction. I can get on to the work. I'm a poker player. And part of what I love about poker is it's a social interaction with a lot of constraints. Like, I don't have to make eye contact if I don't want to. I don't have to talk to anybody if I don't want to. There are certain topics that we do not discuss at the poker table. Maybe a little different than the topics that you'd expect. But there's rules. And I find that very reassuring while I can still be around people. Extreme programming is like that. Every Monday we get together and we say, what's the most important thing for us to work on this week? And that's a conversation that includes everybody who's affected by the decisions made in that conversation. But we know what that conversation looks like. We pair, we ensemble program, maybe. Speaking as somebody with ADHD, or as I prefer to call, I don't like that term ADHD, because I don't think I have a deficit of attention, although it is a disorder sometimes. But I don't have a deficit of, I have plenty of attention. I just get bored really easily. So I call it boredom sensitivity. I'm very sensitive to boredom. So ensemble programming, for me personally, it's not my thing, just because I get bored so quickly. But doesn't mean don't do it. Just that's my personal experience of it. Where was I going with this? Jet lag is so much fun because you think completely new thoughts, and sometimes you think those completely new thoughts while you're on stage talking to people. Okay, so we have the forest, which is a set of assumptions, beliefs, rituals, and interactions that are all internally consistent with each other. And we have the desert, which is a set of assumptions, beliefs, rituals, and interactions that are internally consistent. And these two have a very difficult time communicating between them because important concepts mean opposites depending on where you are. Let me take you through a few of the things that I have experienced this kind of disconnect. So, metrics. Okay, I'm not going to go off on the developer efficiency rant, but I have one. If you're looking for a rant later, come and see me. So metrics, what are metrics for? In the forest, metrics are a form of self-reflection. How we doing? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? What can we experiment with next? How'd that last experiment go? Metrics are fantastic in the forest as a way of becoming aware of yourself and your team's performance and the consequences of those decisions. In the desert, metrics are a form of control. It's data given by people with less power to people with more power so that the people with more power can exercise more control over the people with less power. This is surveillance management. And having a conversation about metrics between the forest and the desert is supremely uncomfortable because the assumptions you're making are just totally opposite. So how many tests did you run per hour over the last month? Why do you want to know? Are the people who ran the fewest tests over the last month going to get put on performance improvement plans? In the forest, though, we just answer the question. In the desert, that's a question with tons of downside and very little upside. In the forest, how many tests did you run last month and how's that compare to the month before, is a question with large upside. We may discover something interesting about our workflow and no downside. We can just answer the question honestly. Any discussion of metrics, I believe that the United Nations should establish a treaty that any discussion that includes metrics should be required by international law to include Goodhart's law, which states that any metric ceases to be useful as soon as it becomes a goal. So, I mean, maybe this is more of an EU thing, or we could leave it to individual countries, but there should be a law that says if you mention metrics, you also have to mention the fact that if there's any kind of incentive attached to that metric, you're never going to get honest data ever again. That's the reality of life in the desert. Dependencies mean completely different things in the forest and the desert. In the desert, dependencies, I realize I'm being inconsistent about which side of the stage is the desert and which side is the forest, so I apologize for that. I'm still going to continue to be inconsistent about it, though. So if you're waiting, if your OCD mind is waiting for me to figure out which one is which, it's just not going to happen today. Sorry. Dependencies. In the desert, dependencies are fantastic as a way of avoiding blame. There's a game I learned as a young engineer called Schedule Chicken. Do you know the game of chicken where two people drive cars at each other at high speed and the one who turns off first is the chicken? Or Angsthausen? Well, Schedule Chicken's kind of like that, except everybody sits in a circle. Everybody knows that we're going to miss the deadline. And the first person who says, we're going to miss the deadline, they're the chicken. So it's a little like a poker table in that way. It's like, going to be you, going to be you. It's not going to be me. Finally, somebody goes, my team's not going to make it. And you're like, oh, your team. Dependency, but that's value add in the desert. It means that not everybody's going to be punished, which is better than what might happen if we all collectively accepted responsibility for something like a schedule slip. Dependencies in the forest is a very different gesture. You want to achieve economies of scale. So when there's the genuine opportunity for economies of scale, you create a team around that. But then the boundaries between the team that's optimizing the build systems, for example, and everybody else, the boundaries are fuzzy. So if something about the build system needs to change, you form a task force that goes between those two teams, the team that needs the change and the team that rents. It's more like renting. Dependencies in the forest is more like renting than owning. That rents the build system. You have a task force between them and you work it out together. In the desert, you got JIRA tickets and you've got a backlog and you've got backlog grooming. Backlog grooming is like a collective form of grief. I'm just going to leave that one. Oh. But, I mean, imagine having a conversation between the desert and the forest, and you're talking about dependencies and how you manage them. You say the same words, but you're not talking about the same concepts at all. Compliance. I gave a talk recently, and there were signs everywhere about compliance. And I realized this is just a different world than I live in. Compliance or auditing. I've worked in the insurance industry for 25 years. And compliance is a huge, big deal. But the way we do it, it doesn't turn into waterfall development where we blame the auditors for making us do stupid stuff. We want to be compliant because we want to deliver financial services responsibly. And compliance is a way of getting another perspective on how we can be more responsible about our delivery. That's the forest version of compliance. The desert version of compliance is one more rock for me to hit you with, as if I didn't already have enough. Well, we have to do this. More reviews, another stage of reviews, more delay, less value delivered. We have to. Hands are tied because compliance. And it becomes a form of control and trying to make the whole world more predictable and more under control. Here's a word I love. Now, as I've talked about accountability, I've learned the different languages slice up the concepts around accountability, responsibility differently. Here's what I mean by accountability. If you look up accountability in the dictionary, it literally says required to render account. So if you give me 100 euros, thank you. And if I'm accountable to you for that 100 euros, it means I tell you how I spent it. It doesn't mean you get to tell me how I spend it. It means I tell you, well, I bought a coffee, another coffee, and then it was all gone. But if I do something stupid with it, I just tell you, oh, and 20 fell out of my pocket and I don't know where it went. Well, you're mad that I wasted 20 euros. Yeah, that makes sense. But I've been accountable to you. Accountability in the forest is a way of demonstrating trustworthiness. You can trust me because I'm accountable to you. The way that word accountability is used in American business, at least, it's a synonym for blame. I will hold you accountable, but that's not what the word means originally. And blaming is a very desert thing to do. Blaming is a powerful skill to have in the desert. It just wrecks the forest if you do that. You know what? I'm going to jump to the end of it. Here's where we're trying to get to. Can we go from the desert, which is what the world asks us to do, to the forest? It's possible. It starts one little tuft of grass being planted at a time and nurtured and building in cycles a community around people who want to operate together with purpose and with honor. And I believe that it's possible to get there. The QR code is the Tidy First Substack. I haven't talked at all about software design or vibe coding or any of the other things that I wanted to talk about. But thank you all very much for your time and attention. We have 4-ish minutes for questions, and somebody's supposed to throw something at you if you want to ask a question. That sounded bad, but I don't think it's going to be that way. Thank you so much.